Taylor's Espresso. Style with character.
Talking with me on the very day before he was diagnosed with cancer is one of Britain's most gifted and original radio broadcasters. Starting his career as a music journalist, he went on to enjoy success on television. But it's on radio that he truly excels, generating more original ideas in a single programme than most broadcasters can manage in a lifetime. He's also been the brilliant writing brain behind many a famous television personality. So does he sometimes feel that his talents have not received the full recognition they deserve? I'll be talking with him about this and other matters in confidence. I don't know whether you're ever going to see this programme yourself, because you always...
I saw everything on the last series.
Did you? But you always say you don't watch television.
I do watch television. When I say I don't watch television, I don't watch modish television.
What do you watch?
Like everybody else, probably box sets, but I watched Jeff Stelling on Saturday afternoons. I have from a pattern when you're younger, whereby you govern time by what day it is, Top of the Pops Thursday and...
I love Jeff Stelling, but I mean, that's the programme where he's constantly got a little panel of footballers.
Yeah, and it's a terrific programme. Terrific programme. It's influenced so much in sporting broadcast. But no, I don't watch a lot of television. I don't know who does anymore in this fractured television age. I think we're trying now not to watch something like Mad Men because the box set will be out in 8 weeks. But I certainly I trust there's not going to be a box set of this series, so I tend to try and catch it. Peter Kay said he lives his life these days on 30 times, which is the Sky Plus singer course. But no, I caught a lot of this last series and intimidated myself by watching the Jonathan Miller one just before I came here today.
I know when you arrived, you said, "Look, I don't have any opinions."
I was hoping a bit of that deep dish would rub off of me because I don't think there is any.
But you have said that you don't listen to radio very much.
I've never listened to radio.
Didn't you?
I never did listen to radio, which is strange given that that's all I do these days. And when people talk about, the Radio 1 Roadshow or the DLT days, I was never a radio listener.
You never heard Kenny Everett or?
No, I mean I did stuff with Kenny Everett, and I've you heard it in CAFs and cabs, but I was never a radio listener because I was such a, I suppose you could call it a music snob, or my music didn't chime in with anything that I'd heard on the radio. I used to be so into underground music, progressive music, and I never even listened to John Peel until quite late. But the radio it wasn't played a lot in our house other than family favourites and things like that, and I wasn't curious about it. Never had a transistor, nothing.
There's a funny thing about that, because when you went to do a radio programme, the John Humphreys programme, the Radio 4 programme, On the Ropes, you said you didn't even realise what the programme was.
I didn't. Well, it asked me about 4 times. It became... I kind of got withering looks and sympathetic looks for about 6 months after that, because I had no idea this programme was about tremendous crash and burn failures and how they picked up the pieces of their life. I simply had no concept of this. And they kept saying, we really want you to do it. And I don't do a lot of stuff through, demand and just choice. And they kept saying, and then they said, well, look, we'll come to you. And I thought, well, OK. And John Humphreys, he's somebody. And it was about halfway through it, and if it had been on the red button, you'd have seen this quizzical look over my face, thinking, are you talking to somebody behind me? I genuinely had no concept.
He kept saying, tell me about your next failure, because what he wanted, he wanted the story of your failure.
Well, he wanted me to say, and I remember him saying, because when I did TFI Friday, and I wrote all the TFI Fridays, that surely you must have, when Chris Evans went at it to do that show, you must have thought, well, that should be me, what's happened to me? It couldn't be more the opposite. The idea that I wanted to, boy, big town, I'll get you yet. And I just cannot review any of the very few triumphs and lots of catastrophes in my career as anything other than next. It just...
But you realised after you'd made the programme, somebody said, what were you doing?
It was a friend of my wife's, it's never discussed what I do. I'm just indoors. Nobody ever really acknowledges it. But she came round and Lynn said to me, she went, she doesn't seem to me, without being patronising, a typical Radio 4 listener. She went, oh, Dan, I heard you on the radio the other morning. You were struggling, weren't you? Was I? It was as bad as I don't even remember it as being bad. But then again, I had no idea of the tone of the show or what the show entailed. On the Ropes, it may have been around 30 years for all I knew. And now, Roundup of the Week's news with the celebrity on the Ropes. I had no idea what it was. And that was a little bit rattling, the idea that there is this perception of you as the kind of typhoid Mary of recent media. But equally, I'm not prone to.
I'll tell you the thing about you not listening to the radio, but like when you like at home when you were young, when you were in the house there. I mean, didn't people listen to sit around?
Music was all over the place. Yeah. The record library was the big thing.
Yeah,
there was a classic kind of town hall library near us, or a bus ride away, and going to the record library was huge. I mean, my brother and my sister were the Beatles and the Beach Boys and all that was all around. Music was around, but not radio. Radio just... so
you're not listening to Hancock's Half Hour, you're not listening to...
No, I listened to Hancock's Half Hour endlessly on record. I only knew the Goon Show. I knew was purely, Tales of Old Dartmoor, Tales of Men's Shirts, all of the... off by heart. Off by heart. We always had comedy albums in there. Max at the Met, I can still lip sync, and I'll do it if you want. If this really gets slow over the next hour, I'll do it for you. But my dad used to wash the records under the tap. That's the other great memory of that. We used to take them back. If anyone does remember record libraries, they would come with a card. They were same as book libraries, but they were albums. And they would come with a card that had a drawing of both sides of the record with little lines showing where the scratches were when you took it out. And if you'd added to the sum of those when you took it back, you were fined tuppence or something. So my dad had this system, and they would turn on the tap and just talk to me with my mum while running water on both sides of a vinyl record, getting a tea towel. That's lovely, that, and putting it back in. God knows what they sounded like, but they weren't scratched, but they were probably unplayable. But the music, came from my brother and my sister, and, Ivan Novello records used to be played a lot. One of the few albums they went out and bought was the best of Ivan Novello with Glamorous Nights and Rose of England and I Will Give You the Starlight and things like that, as well as, fairly broad late 50s records.
But when I was looking at what you were doing, it seemed to be comics that played the part. I mean, if you weren't listening to the radio, you weren't watching television. It was comics.
I watched telly when I was a kid. I watched telly all the time. I'm going to be wrong now. I was, as much as anybody. But comics, the Beano and stuff like that. I don't think that was extraordinary. No? I don't think that was particularly influential. I never liked what they call in the graphic novels or whatever ludicrous term they got. Jonathan Ross is a big fan of Superman and Green Lantern and all that, and. But I could not get into that. But what I did like was the Harvey comics, which were the kind of cartoony, in the best sense of the word, version of that, with Wendy the Witch and Casper and Hot Stuff the Devil. It would have took us down that route. But I don't see it necessarily as formative. I just. But
you reckon the one side that you could tell if you named the comic, you could say what the man was like, so that Beano, Hotspur, people who read those.
I agree with that. Yeah, I think the more.
I mean, you're a Beano man, completely.
Oh, completely Beano. Actually, Beezer. The Beezer I used to love. Colonel Gink, Colonel Blink, the short-sighted Gink, and the Beezer had really good stuff in it. But Dandy I didn't like. The Dandy was not as good enough jokes. But yes, I do believe that once I see people reading Hotspur and the war stuff, didn't occur to me.
Your brother read Hotspur, didn't he?
Brother, yes, he did. Well, yeah, my brother read Hotspur, and I used to leave it lying there, and I just think this is just verbose and rugged. My brother was very good with his hands, could make anything, could do anything. But I just wanted jokes, and I loved the idea that when I'd put on these albums, the idea of Hancock and all of that, and the huge laughs that would take up 30 seconds afterwards. That was very attractive.
Because there used to be jokes, didn't there? I think it was the Beano. Was it the Beano or the Dandy? Because they used to run jokes across the top of the pages and so much,
Yeah, and Mad Magazine, of course. Never underestimate the huge Mad Magazine influence, I think, of anyone who turned out to be vaguely associated with comedy after that, because the Mad Magazine, and that they used to put, Sergio Aragonés used to do little tiny drawings in the margins, and I've always thought of that whenever I was writing scripts, that you should look for places, whether it's bumpers going into the ad break or just little kind of runners everywhere, and that's purely Mad Magazine, I think, and probably the Beano had those runners at the top and bottom of the page, but looking at Mad Magazine, it would cram little jokes if you find them.
Yeah.
And I always thought that was just terrific, Mad Magazine. Anyway, I didn't get half the jokes because it was all based on American suburbia, a lot of them. But I knew it was funny.
when you were growing up, I mean, there was a whole family of performers. Do you remember, because your grandmother as well? I mean, she had a pub named after.
When she went, yeah, they named it a pub on the Isle of Dogs.
Tell me about what they did as performers, because I've read
They were performers. I don't think they were performers. I mean, I think you could say they were vibrant and bombastic and loud. The Baker side of the family is, because there was a lot of them. I could never work out if my dad was one of 12 or one of 14, but he's 8th within that anyway. And so it was a very competitive household to get seen. And when we'd go over to the Isle of Dogs where my nan lived, and she was a true matriarch of the family. I mean, a real terrific, wild, loud personality, my nan. And everyone used to gather around and seeing these fellas, my dad and his brothers are all dockers, and seeing them sit around in that room and be cowed and not be the kind of people I was used to, effing and blinding and screaming. But they would sit there and let Mum take over, and she would... And yet when it came their turn, of course it was competitive, and it would be that thing in families where you say, tell them again, they just want to hear the same stories. What about when you were with, Joyce's shoes or so-and-so? And I'd love hearing them stories over and over again, and the explosions that came out. You knew it was coming. I knew the stories, but explosions at the end of them where people would wipe away tears. I mean, Dad used to sing in pubs a lot and always thinks Max Bygrove stole his career. Maybe a grain of truth in that. But there was, he wouldn't have known how to go about it. But he was a good compere at the City Arms and various pubs over the Isle of Dogs. Everyone knew me dad for sometimes infamous reasons over there. But and him and his brothers, there was a lot of them. But they weren't performers. There was no, there's no one in the family I don't think could have done it professionally. But there's a tremendous strain of confidence through them that I saw. I had no option but to think that's how people behaved. You fought to get your stories heard, and I think that's what led us in.
How were you in the family order? Because there were 3 of you. I'm
the youngest.
That's right. There was the sister Sharon, and then there was the brother Michael, who sadly, very sadly died when he was
29. 29. I know, 29. Just he died on a drinking binge. He was a docker himself. I had to take his medical, Michael, because he was blind in one eye. We lived by a bomb site. Sorry if this ain't pertinent, I'll come round to it again. But we lived by, in the early 60s, there were quite a lot of bomb sites, of course, and our flats were here, and there was a bomb site. We called the Dump, and it was the most dangerous thing you've ever come across. I'm just in the process of writing an autobiography, and I was about quite a way into it, a couple of chapters, and I remembered sitting in this burning car on the bomb site. And I thought, actually, this is the beginning of the book. You start a book where you're sitting in a car that's ablaze because you and your mates have set it on fire, and I'm 7, and we're playing chicken. Who's going to be the last one to get out? Didn't occur to us there might be a reservoir of oil or petrol in there. And this dump was just... a friend of mine was disfigured because we all got bleach bottles we found on there one day, discarded bleach bottles, put them on a stick, set fire to them like we were going to torches. And, of course, it immediately melted down his arm, encased it in absolutely scalding plastic. He's still disfigured. And my brother was over there and found some thin metal sheets. I used to wrap newspapers in these thin... and doing this, him and his mates, and his mate come near him and blinded him in one eye. Anyway, so Michael wanted to be a docker. He used to be a market porter at the Borough Market. And I had to go and do his medical for him because he would not have got in, even though there was a lot of money passed around to get sons straight in. You still had to do this medical with a straight doctor and this aptitude test and stuff. And Michael was... he sent me along. I think I was 17 or maybe 16, and I'm supposed to be 24. And I walk in, you see, even then, 24-year-old blokes who wanted to be doctors were big fellas. And you got this little kind of punk rocker fella sitting there. And I tried to bluff him, and they said, in the exam, what did you write for that one? I had no idea what they were talking about. But anyway, I got Michael his book for the doc. Technically, I could have got it. I've been a docker myself. He was a doctor, and he was not particularly a heavy drinker, but one day he did that thing. We've all suffered with our sinuses. People for years must think he's got a cocaine addiction, because I would quite often go... Like that a lot.
He died in the night, did he? Or
no, he went to a leaving do.
Yeah.
He went to a leaving do on a Friday for an old docker. They must have, really tied one on. Came home, and it's one of those things which apparently are not uncommon. He got his head in a position whereby he couldn't breathe through his... he was totally drunk, couldn't breathe through his nose, and choked and died. And that was 1982. He's in 29.
That hit you. That really hit you, didn't it? At the time?
For God's sake, yeah. I mean, God knows, he's my older brother, and he was, of course, totally. But it wasn't as much that; it's actually what it would have. We knew because I got the call with my sister, and I knew what it was. I had to go around and tell my mum and dad. I was 23, I was 22, and I had to go around, and you knock on the door now. Oh boy, what do you want? Yeah, that was tough, and I want
to talk a bit about because this is. What you've described, is a working class family, working class background, solidly white working class,
Yeah.
all the business. It used to, at the time, when you were sort of growing up, that was always, salt of the earth, and these were,
Yeah.
and all that wasn't, you had all that Richard Hoggart writing uses of literacy, the
Yeah.
working class were wonderful and so on. I mean, but you're a bit ambivalent about this. You really don't like people pressing it too hard on you.
I'll tell you why that was, because it became it became when I first started doing television. And remember, by the time I started doing telly in '79, I'd been a writer for the NME, as much as that counts, and I'd been around the block. It was like kind of Elvis going into the army. I'd had these wild rock and roll years, which I suspect is why I've never owned a big red sports car. I've always kind of been my age. I did what I was supposed to be doing at every age I've been at. But people have used terms, certainly of me, and then sometimes I could be guilty of being larger than, I am. I talk broader than what I used to on the television. And, the professional Cockney thing, in a way that they wouldn't have done had I been Asian or whatever, there was never an encouragement. But there was a certain suspicion and cynicism, certainly in media, on and off screen, and in reviews, that, this fella's got one card and he plays it. Never listen to what I say, but they'd hear the attack of what you say. They hear, and all that. And they used to. I've done interviews as recently as 5 years ago with The Independent, where they still leave the G's off of my words or the H's at the beginning of them in a way that, of course, you wouldn't do with anyone else. I mean, they say this is quite recent, and the woman who wrote the piece started by saying, first thing you notice when you go to his house, it's not like Del Boy's flat, it's actually quite tasteful. And now I think there is still that, especially in the media, where they're quite insecure about the working class, or what used to be the working class, and they think that's what you're doing. Oh, that's his act, which sometimes I lent on that, certainly. But I kind of backed off of it, and I rarely would talk on TV after a while and about, or even talk like I spoke. And when I get angry, or even now, I probably don't sound like I do on the radio. It's not a conscious thing, but also you probably had to draw it in, lest people think, oh, that's what he is, that's what he does. He's a red-nosed trouser dropping later sub Max Miller type.
Because lately there have been a few books. There's about, I don't know whether there's a book by a man called Michael Collins called The Likes of Us and so on, which is all about how the white working class have been dumped on, really, now. And now everybody talks about them in terms of, like, Essex girls and hoodies and yobs and everything like that. I mean, I wonder to what extent you think that, really, in a way, that there was it was a class that was patronised and all that
I would totally agree with that. And it's difficult to find a sympathetic ear to it, because it's been it has been parodied and cartooned. And even if you try to talk with affection about it, people... I think the middle class feel threatened by the idea that there really was this warm
community.
Subculture. Yeah, they really... And they do feel that. And if I do start saying... I remember even shows that I've done, like fantasy football, but they will introduce a Pearly King at one point and offer me jellied eels. And I think that's a way of... But, of course, it's outrageous in terms of, they're sending it all up. But I think it was a way of diffusing and actually trying to say... I mean, I never, when I was in the NME and in the music business and during punk rock, never... rarely, maybe 3 or 4 actually other genuine working class people. But I didn't want to make a big deal of that. That's all right, because that's how that is. It is, rock and roll is a fraud of an industry and stuff. But I was a receptionist at the NME originally, and seeing these people who dropped their H's and wore leather jackets, and it did start to strike me suspicious. And I'd say to them before football was fashionable, and they didn't know, and they were aping the attitudes, the helpful attitudes of working class, without ever have been it, which didn't bother us at all. But I found it unusual. And yet when I tried to bolster, if you want, the bona fides of really coming from a family, when Mum worked in a factory and my dad was in the docks, it became a reality that they felt a little bit threatened by, and could only reduce to cliche in order to deal with it. Yeah. Oh, listen to him. Oh, yeah, I suppose you had coal in it, and you think... And so I'd back off. Well, you don't know what it was like. I'd still lived like that till quite recently. But now, looking back, and I thought, that was odd. That must have been an experience, without over-dramatising it, a little like being an immigrant. Because in terms of my career, that's what I was. It was this immigrant in media. There weren't a lot of people unless they aped it. And you found out, and I used to be a little bit disappointed when people would say, oh, no, I'm from, but I went, even when people went to grammar school, I thought it was, because I left school at 14. It wasn't judgmental in reverse. I just thought, this is peculiar. I actually don't know anybody, apart from the people in the canteen and the bloke the driver they sent to pick you up, who is in this game.
You must have resented. I mean, you
No,
sound.
I didn't resent it at all.
But what about the Mockneys? I mean, the people coming on.
Didn't resent. But that's what it is. Yeah. That's what it is. You can't suddenly get there and go, oh my God, the media's full of middle class people. What a shock. No, I've never resented it. I genuinely have never resented it at all. I can get some resentment if I think about some of the attitudes that people. I've had people genuinely, over the years and years and years say, hello, Danny Baker, how are you? They'll do that, as which would forgive me here, but if I was Asian, I would say, oh, golly gosh, how are you today? And it's exactly the same thing on an international scale. It's called racism. But the class system in Britain, which has always embarrassed the middle class, and it's certainly become more and more so, it's easy if you just get on with us, and we don't have to, or we can diffuse it perhaps by saying you think it's all a bit of a joke too. I don't think I was selling out in saying, not calling them on it.
I remember that article, that taste one, because whoever she was, I think it was a she, wasn't it? She came round and said, oh, we're quite surprised to find that there were decent curtains.
Which brings back to, it's not me. It's not, shutters, thank you. But it wasn't, it's not me, it's Wendy. I mean, my wife's one of 10. She's the seventh in seven sisters, and they're from Romford. Again, she was the only other genuine prole at the NME when I was there. She was the editor's secretary. And we used to share a secret language of little jokes that when you know something's genuine, I remember a phrase she used, somebody had submitted, Nick Kent, the famous writer Nick Kent, used to write his copy on the back of whatever was around. If it was a cornflakes box, he would write these fantastic articles about the Beach Boys, but he would write them on whatever papers around. He couldn't type, and Wendy had to type them up. My wife had to type them up. Just as she was putting her coat on, Nick would come in and go, oh, Wendy, I'm so sorry, could you, like this 10,000-word piece on Brian Wilson or something? She'd take her coat off and dutifully do it, And I remember her saying to me once, she lifted a bit of paper he'd given in, she went, it was a tissue or something, she went, look at that. And I said, bleeding old thing. And now that was only saying her mum would have said, no, mum would have said, you could have said to anybody else or that they wouldn't have got. And she cried with laughter. And it's that kind of connection where you think you don't have to, so get your bona fides out here and say this or have a bleeding heart or a violin. You say something like bleeding old thing and you think, oh, that's where you're from. And I think all cultures, if working class can be said to be a culture, it's like that.
One thing about that culture, that working class culture, because when you were at school, you were great at school. You didn't go to grammar school. You could have gone to grammar school.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, so I could have gone. I was always good in exams. And I came first at Rotherhithe Junior Mixed, and that entitled you to a place at Addy and Stanhope, the only grammar school in the area. But none of my mates were going there, so I didn't. And there wasn't any pressure at me dad. He was, oh, don't you want to go there? So I said, no, I want to go on West Greenwich, which was top of Deptford High Street, a big comprehensive, and that's where I went. And it was terrific. It was great. Again, even on Laurie, I can sense I'm doing it now. I want to tell stories about West Greenwich, but they sound, because they've been aped elsewhere, or even invented elsewhere, you think, well, is it worth it? Teacher was killed by a pupil with a shot put.
We never found out who did it.
That was well, we knew who did it, but we don't know what happened to him. We don't know what happened to him. He ran out of the sports place where we were at, and what the grudge was, we didn't know, and it was a sensation. But it disappeared. It just disappeared. People say, "What happened to the kid?" And you say, "I don't know." And I think, that sounds incurious of you, at a school, and it was a horrible event.
You were never exactly very countercultural, though, were you? I mean, what was your take on punk? I mean,
again, at the time, that has been distorted out of all recognition, what punk rock was, and I always see it very much as it was. At the time, I think it still should be seen very much as a gathering of music bores. Punk rock, because I knew I would have knew the Clash, I knew the Pistols, I was just going on the road with them and all of this, but we all had the same record collections, and they weren't the normal record collections. We didn't have the stuff that people bought. We all knew Captain Beefheart, we all knew Joni Mitchell, we all knew these things, and it was because punk rock was a full stop, not a beginning. It was definitely a full stop, because that period between there's 6-7 years between Woodstock and the Sex Pistols. In that period, when you get the rise of heavy metal, the invention of these things being pulled out of the air, remember, progressive rock being pulled out of the air, the singer-songwriter, the James Taylors, etc., the second rise of reggae with Bob Marley and Big Youth, the second rise of Motown with Stevie Wonder and the Marvin Gaye later albums, Kraftwerk, all the German stuff, every one of these genres, one after the other, being pulled out of the air in that 6-year period, and music just went nuts. And then, no wonder punk rockers said, we're bored. Nothing had happened for 6 months. And so punk exploded. But since then, it's been a very thin gruel. All right, you're going to go hip-hop and all that. But that was a tremendously exciting period. And I just, by hook or by crook, wanted to be part of it. It was mainly pure chance. I mean, look at Sniffing Glue, the magazine which started us on whatever trajectory this was. My sister had a typewriter. Mark Perry, who had started the magazine, didn't have a typewriter. And the girl I was going out with at the time saw his magazine, which I thought was rotten. Magazine. He stapled it together in the corner, which is now recognised as a style. It was purely homegrown. And he said, can I borrow your sister's typewriter? And Sharon, the girl I was going out with at the time, said, I think that's really good. I said, do you? And so I warmed to Mark, who at school we weren't that close to. He used to go to my school, now he worked in a bank. And I saw him as a sellout for that. And we started this magazine, which, boom, all of a sudden Janet Street Porter's interviewing me, bang, I'm on television, and here I am.
You're not right. You weren't writing for it, though, were you?
Yeah.
Were you writing? What were you writing? What were you writing for Sniffing Glue? Because I know you got into writing when you got into NME.
No, I wrote with Sniffing Glue. I wrote. We used to go and see people, and we'd go to these clubs like the Roxy and all of this, and I'd write little reviews, hoping to catch the eye. In all honesty, of music papers, which I adored. The NME I used to eat. Leave. Just couldn't. But when the NME came out on a Wednesday, I would devour it. People like Charles Sean Murray and all the writers at the NME, I just thought, well, that's it. That's what I want to do.
But you were putting jokes in, weren't you? I mean,
it was always jokes.
When you were reviewing, I mean, you really enjoyed if it was a bad record or something like that.
Yeah. By the time I was at the NME, I remember I didn't quite have the courage and the courage in my convictions when Tony Parsons asked me to join the NME. He said, we need someone on reception. We get a lot of nutcases up there. So we ever got a receptionist. So I was a receptionist for 18 months and then had to leave because I was taking too much time out and had to go on the road with groups. That the two girls who worked in reception with me, you off again next week? We're not covering for you all the time. So I thought I'd better join the staff. So I did. That really was it. But no, I used to do a lot of jokes. I used to come up with the headlines a lot, sometimes 6 or 7 headlines, and they'd run 3 or 4 of them because my real stock in trade was knowing old films and stealing jokes and them and using them as captions. And it was kind of, the NME had introduced me to that thing which is now sadly the culture. The counterculture then would be disrespectful to. Do
you remember
stars.
The first thing you wrote? The very first thing you wrote? I mean, cause
for the NME.
It was an odd idea in a way for you.
It
hadn't occurred to you, really.
It hadn't. The first thing I wrote, and remember, we were literally a A4 sheets of paper typed, Xeroxed. We had a table, we'd put all the pages around, and me and Steve and Mark, who were the magazine, would walk around this table, picking up a page, and staple it, picking up a page, picking up a page. Thank God for amphetamine sulfate. And we'd do this all night. And then in the morning we'd have them, we'd put, in the same, then we'd add all these magazines. We'd go into record shops, of which there were loads, and say, we do this magazine, and punk was in the air, and we would sell it to them for 5p, and they would sell it for 10p, and we had no money out of it. I mean, by the end, it literally didn't, because Mark had a band, and it all went into that. And but writing for it, I went to see, I think it was Johnny Moped, and a group called Screwdriver went on to be notorious as a fascist supporting group, and still are. But they weren't then. They were just some kids down from Blackpool wearing eyeliner who had heard about the punk scene. And I wrote this thing about them. Put a few jokes in there, put a Frank Zappa reference in there, I remember, saying, because he wore brown loafer boots, Johnny Moped, he was strange. And I said, on this night, brown shoes did make it, because there's a Frank Zappa song called Brown Shoes Don't Make It. And a lot of the rock establishment thought, oh, thank God, these people haven't just arrived in the, from a pop. This is not year zero. This is, and I think that they warmed to me, and eventually they asked me to join the NME. We used to write whatever we want, though.
But in a way, when I'm looking back at some of that stuff, it's almost rather like Clive James writing about television. You were almost waiting for an opportunity to be funny.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, also, you've said somewhere about like funny at the expense of other people's craft.
Yes, it really was. It really was. And well, I think it's like Chuck Jones said about the Warner Brothers cartoons when they said, they're very smart. They're very. Who did you do those cartoons for, the kids or the adults? And Chuck Jones said, we did it for ourselves. We presumed it was just it wouldn't amount to anything. And that was the thing, especially on the NME. If I could make the other fellas on the NME laugh, I'm afraid, even if your album's the best in the world. I remember there was one record called This Is My World or something. It was quite a good single. And I remember wrestling with it, and I just thought, the joke here is just to put the review, just small world, isn't it? Right, that was all it was. And I thought, dare I do it? 'Cause it's quite a nice one. I thought I will, because I'll get a laugh with it. And that, I'm afraid, rather shamefully, was the motif for it. It was just making the others laugh on the enemy, and us, by extension, the readers. But no, they were grist, I'm afraid. All the rock bands were grist. The famous headlines in the enemy, Freddie Mercury had the headline, "Is this man a prat?" Which now, of course, has been... You can't help but feel partially responsible for the coarse kind of celebrity culture, but then it was revolutionary. Brian Ferry, when he dressed with a big wide-brimmed hat like the Sandeman Portman, Well, the headline told you what it was. It just said, "How gauche can a gaucho get?" That was it. And poor Brian, who had an album to sell and was at the front of fashion then, but the laugh was everything, you know? It really was.
But it sounds like you did to journalism what you later went on to do to radio, really. You just took the whole thing apart and didn't take it seriously.
Yeah,
you made up interviews, didn't you?
I made up quite a few interviews, but I don't think I was alone in that. I mean, the enemy was pretty much established as the flip, cynical newspaper it was long before I was there. People like Tony Tyler and Ian MacDonald, all good writers, of course. And the one thing was, that was the thing about the enemy. They actually were good writers amongst all of this flip nonsense. And in the end, I literally just used to write the jokes. I used to write the gossip column and make that up. Gossip, I'd say, who knew Peter Gabriel's dad was a football referee? Yeah, it turns out between 1951 and 53, he took charge, never of higher league games, but in the lower leagues he was quite well known, gave it up to be a straight businessman, and it was he who changed the family name from Labriel to Gabriel. It means nothing, but people say, is this true? And it occurred to me it didn't matter. It's just, get me through
nobody ever complained when you
Nobody
made,
ever
when you made up the whole Paul Weller interview.
Yeah, well, that was circumstances made that. Paul told me in Hamburg that the Jam were breaking up, and we'd been through Checkpoint Charlie and all of this. It was East Germany we'd been in. And then one night, Rick and Bruce, who were a lot of fun, but they went off down to Reaper Barn or something. And Paul said, "Dan, do you want to do the interview now?" Which was always the words to put a cold, icy hand around my heart. And I said, OK. And we went downstairs, and Paul just sort of said, "You know what, I'm disillusioned," and gave it all of this. But I had a little cassette recorder with a directional microphone on it. And so I'm listening and thinking, damn, I wish I was sober. This seems like a really good piece. And he was, being forthright and very good. And the Jam were huge at the time. And when I came to transcribe the tape, which is something nobody likes doing, all right, let's do this, I better write this. I had the directional mic under a speaker that was playing Girl from Ipanema and all of this. And all you could hear was Paul Weller going, but you had tall and tanned and young and lovely. And I thought, oh, well, I think I remember that. And so I went ahead and, did this terrific interview with Paul Weller. I don't think he's ever been so sparkling. And I saw him about 3 weeks later. He went, "Did you make that up?" And I said, "Well, when you say made it up, what I did was, I think but it was funny and it was good. And the enemy, you had kind of license to do that. Not everyone did it. And by then I realised I wasn't actually interested in none of the musicians anyway. I actually secretly thought it would be much funnier. It's quite common to do this. It would be much funnier if I write stuff and, occasionally put in quotes. And then I withdrew from doing interviews altogether. The last two I did was Bob Monkhouse in the NME, who was terrific. And I started edging towards it. I did Roy Hudd, because I wasn't interested in musicians anymore. I wanted to talk to funny people.
Just to talk about writing, because I want to... When you started writing, when you were writing for other people, because when you started writing, when you wrote for Chris Evans, you wrote for Jonathan Ross, Angus Deaton, Ricky Gervais, everything. Yeah. All that. When was the first time that you actually wrote for another comic, another performer?
Again, I think had I been to so-called better schools, and I'd have done it a lot earlier. I always knew I could do it. I used to write very funny stuff in the enemy, never for publishing. I used to write real good parodies that about groups, and they were never for publication. I used to literally spend 2 or 3 hours writing them and put them on other writers' desks, and they'd pick them up, and I would just watch them from afar as they cried with laughter. These quotes, it was never meant for public. I've got none of them, which I did. A lot of them football-based and stuff, and mixing up genres. And I used to just do that for my own benefit. Now, I think today I'd have been straight into some company and saying, do this, do that. But I just didn't have the nerve. Didn't have the nerve to do it. And then when I kind of started the 6 o'clock show in London, as a direct result of Janet Street Porter, who was on the 6 o'clock show, seeing me and interviewing me as a punk rocker.
We just need to say it's telly, yeah.
Yeah, it was a TV show, the 6 o'clock show, when we did that, because it was a red-nosed, trouser-dropping picture post, best described as, if you like, very broad.
You were a reporter?
I was a reporter on it, and I got the gig purely because when we were interviewed as punk rockers, everyone else was not very good at telly, and I just thought, this is great, I can do this. And I used to, again, coming from that background where I'm not going to wait for you, I've got razor blades on my elbows, and so they'd say, what is this punk rock? And whereas a few would go, well, what we're going to do, society, right, is like, these people, they're from Harrow or whatever, and I say, what it is what else are we supposed to do? What are we supposed to do? I said, it may come to nothing, it may be something. And the moment it's our hour in the sun, we're loving it. And it was that kind of, I knew how to do that. Janet Report remembered it and asked me on this show called the 6 o'clock show, which she actually asked me to do a thing called 20th Century Box, a youth show, which was very difficult. And she was very good to me, and then she asked us to go on this 6 o'clock show. Very broad, mums and dads tea time show. And so, I went on and did that. And
you went out interviewing?
Yeah, when interviewing people, Vox Popping, I did 6.5 years of that. And it was pure gravy. All of a sudden, I'm earning £1,200 a week, and I'm very popular. And but I was formerly a punk rock and rock and roll writer. I've been on tour with Pistols in America. I've been at Michael Jackson's house. I've done all of this stuff. Now I am an old person's young person, so, in that kind of style that people talk like that. You might think this is ordinary glass of water. Well, there's one man who says it's not. It's rocket fuel. His name's Laurie Taylor, and I'm about to meet him. I knew how to do that. I mean, I just thought that's what they want.
Fred Housego was the first, wasn't he?
Fred, yeah.
He has a peculiar alter ego thing in your life.
Exactly, and I just knew how to do that. So, of course, I wasn't that, and I didn't. That's why I've never resented. I didn't want people confusing that. I looked at this thing, I thought, OK, I know what they want here. And you talk to anyone at 6 o'clock, and they say, the thing with Dan, he knew what we wanted. If you say, I could take a script, put some jokes in it and say, it's budgerigars, it's 6 o'clock in the evening on Fridays, you've got an audience there who just want you to talk about budgets, Fun, and that would be the voice. It's my dad's voice, as I call it, Budgies, funny little creatures, your nan probably had one. But the thing with budgerigars, you probably don't realise, they're actually dinosaurs and they're going to kill you. Bang. And who's not going to watch them?
Why'd you call it your dad's voice?
No, Daz.
Oh, Daz voice.
Dad's voice.
Oh, you mean your commercial Daz voice?
Oh, that's because that was what was required. Now, you can call that hollow and cynical and all that, but I didn't want to be remembered for my television work or any of my work. I wanted to live in a nice house and show off to me mates and be able to pay every bill I came across. And suddenly this opportunity fell in me lap on television. And I didn't want to prove anything. Yeah, I didn't want to go on there and say be introverted or actually twist it or subvert. No, and it was a very successful show, extraordinarily successful.
Taylor's.
I always knew it was going to be impossible to follow a straight line talking to you, but we were saying just before about when the first person that you wrote for, the first script you wrote. No.
So I'm doing the 6 o'clock show, and we used to do live on Fridays. Then London Weekend began a thing called Friday Live, which was the very first television of people like Ben Elton and Fry Laurie and Harry Enfield. And I used to go, and Paul Whitehouse, who's a genuine fella, Paul Whitehouse used to be writing there. And Paul Ross was on the 6 o'clock show, and his brother Jonathan.
You mean your producer, hadn't he, Paul Ross?
Paul's actually the first job he ever had leaving Exeter University. He was a researcher on the show.
Researcher, yeah.
This may not interest people, but the 6 o'clock show was this incredible fulcrum for later television. Its editor was a fellow called Greg Dyke. John Burt was his executive producer. People like Charlie Parsons, who went on to do Big Breakfast and everything else, and Paul Ross. Jim Allen, who is responsible for every kind of reality show on television. Jeff Pope, who makes most of the dramas. They were all their first jobs. And they all knew me because I was moderately the star of the show, and they all joined. And anyway, they've all gone on to be tremendously successful. So I used to be there, and Jonathan used to turn up, be around a bit. And he always said, because he was just starting in television, I'd like you to write for me, because he used to read the NME. Oh, that's very flattering. But the very first person was Harry Enfield. Just a couple of lines in some of the Loads of Money stuff. I couldn't believe it. And despite all the stuff I had done, I just couldn't believe it when I had Harry Enfield. I think one of the only things they ever really used, because Paul was very prolific, I gave Loads of Money his drink, which was a true line a friend of mine had said once when he went back to a girl's house and she offered him champagne. And he went, "You've ever had champagne?" This my mate John Wald, he was a bricklayer. And I said, "I've had champagne." Oh, and you know what? It's the best drop of lager you can get. It's the best drop of lager you can get, he said. So when Loads of Money came to need a drink, I say, it's one of the very few things I ever did, was Loads of Money drank champagne top. And he said, "Pint of champagne top, best drop of lager you can get, champagne is." And that was the very first thing I remember somebody else saying. I don't know why I didn't grasp the bull by the horns and invent characters. I know why, because I'm basically lazy and I was earning a lot of money on the 6 o'clock show.
But as someone who's like sort of not ambitious, and I believe you. I believe but because it's all celebrities now announce that they're not ambitious. All celebrities try and be ordinary people. You must have a pretty jaundiced view of the whole celebrity thing.
No, not really.
Yeah.
No, I would do the jungle. If they asked me to go in the jungle, I'd do that. I don't think it's not a debate worth having. I mean, celebrity, it's not compulsory. You can get irritated by it. You can certainly sit around in one of the, rather Swan-Year London fashion and moan about it. But if you choose to avoid it, if you choose not to see it, you can do that too. I can't get something, it's not famine, it's not war, it's not good government policy. Celebrity, there it is, and we're stuck with it. But certainly the lack of ambition or wanting to appear ordinary, I don't know what ordinary means. My life is extraordinary. My private life is much more extraordinary than what I do for a living. That's quite mundane, getting on the tube, doing a radio show, getting the tube, coming home again. I've loved my private life, just my family life and home life, which again sounds cloying. But the idea that I'm just some ordinary person is preposterous. Plainly, this has been an extraordinary life, from serving Elton John records to going on tour with the Sex Pistols to being on telly and that. But that said, if I'd have been more driven, I perhaps would have been lumped alongside of people who are... I don't think people know what I do. And that's all right too.
Who would you like to be? Who would you like to be compared with, though? I mean, if somebody said, "Well, what's the best compliment that anybody could pay you about what you do?" I mean, would they compare you? Would they say, "Okay"? Would they compare you with Kenny Everett? Would they compare you?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's terrific. If people and they did a thing where they said they voted for the DJ's DJ, and to be on that, I'd have been furious not to have been on it, because I know the stuff has worth. I'm not saying it's a 9 to 5 thing. It's not. So I like, being known for being good on the radio. I wish I was on national radio more. They won't. I think I've burned too many bridges there, and they won't take that kind of chance, and I think that's all shifted away from that. Hearing radio, even in the car coming here today, infuriates me. It does infuriate me, and I'm hearing people doing, you're all crazy out there, so tell us what you're doing today, and here's, something. And I think, because I'll get £500 for doing the BBC London show, which people say, lovely. Comes down to 250 quid. That person's on £2,000 for that. It's money for coin for ancient heritage. And that annoys me. I'd like to be on national radio, and I'd like to be doing getting money for jam like that.
But what about heroes then? Somebody did ask you that. I think you came up with Peter Glaze and Fanny Craddock.
Oh, no, that was on TV Heroes, which again was an agenda I was handed.
But they were two of your favourites or something.
No, well, I didn't actually choose the subjects on there. But I'm certainly happy to stick with them.
Yeah.
I'm certainly happy to stick with them. My heroes, without getting highfalutin, because they've got initials in, and that makes it sound highfalutin, is P.G. Woodhouse, S.J. Perelman, and people like that. I've a tremendous amount of time for that, and also Harry Champion and musical stars. But
Perelman and the Marx Brothers scripts.
Well, just Perelman as a writer, just Perelman. Yeah. My favourite book is The Most of S.J. Perelman. I've had millions of copies over the years.
I love that.
Yeah, exactly. And I just feel that kind of wordsmithery is just terrific. And so my heroes are always writers. I read and I read and I read, but always biography or books about comedy.
Those one-liners often, I was sitting in my dentist's waiting room the other day waiting to have a cheque extracted. That's sort of...
That's it, you go. And, of course, that led on to Milligan, which led on to Peter Cook, and my extraordinary awe for the lineage of comedy, to which I don't think, I could have added a stitch. But it really is saying as... probably boring.
But that's quite. It's quite intelligent. It's quite intellectual comedy compared to the other love that you had. When I was reading, when you seemed most happy. I mean, Enemy seemed very, very happy days.
I've never had a down period. I've never. The only time I remember thinking was when it came indoors. I did a terrific show. Which now lives in legend as the beginning of dumbing down television. But it was Pets Win Prizes. I came up with a fellow called Andy Mayer. We came up with Pets Win Prizes. It struck me as a solid gold idea.
Pets Win Prizes.
But by the time, of course, it had been through the machine, it came out the other... I mean, it's a classic argument. Pets Win Prizes, I would do in a heartbeat again. And one thing I wanted to do, which I did do every episode about 6 or 7 times, was run up to the cameras and say, "It's your licence fee at work. It's Pets Win Prize." They cut that out every single time. Every single time, because the BBC was quite nervous about, if people do think this is the most stupid show ever. But if it is, you treat it like it's Ibsen. You go on there and say, "No, we're going to do a thing now. We've got 3 chickens in cages." And now, of course, this sort of thing is done on kids' telly. But at the time, it was 6 o'clock. And it did pretty well as well. Anyway, they made 3 cages, and inside are 3 cockerels. Now, they've been asleep because we've had the studio lights now. We've got the owner of Cockerel 1, owner of Cockerel 2. We're going to take the covers off, and we're going to bring up the studio lights. And it's the first one to go cock-a-doodle-doo. And, of course, we put Grieg Morning behind it. But I would go as if you were looking at wet dynamite. It's the only way you can do it. No, I think it's not good. And sometimes it'd be 20 minutes, it would come down to 2 on the television. And when one actually went, the studio hauled its hats in the air, and it was dopey. And then you want dray horses pulling pints and dogs really playing snooker like on those paintings. And I thought, this is the job I was born to do. Well, everyone hated it. It did great in the ratings.
No, I loved it. I stopped watching when Dale Winton took over.
Well, there it is. And I was just about to say, you say we've ever had a downtime. And I'm indoors Saturday evening. And I'd had a meeting with the BBC where they said, we want to tweak the show for the next series. There was a fellow called Terry Nutkins did it with me. And what they were telling me is, we think Terry's got to go. Are you OK with that? And I said, well, you know what? It's not called show friendship. It's show business. It's been a good run. Anyway, about 2 days later, and I had these other ideas for games in it and all of this. I said, now we're really up the ante. We're really going to go psychedelic now. And the phone rang, and it was a fellow from Daily Mirror. Said, Daily Mirror, just want to get your take on what do you feel like being dumped from Petworth in Paris. I said, oh, you didn't know? I said, no. He said, Dale Winters. And I put the phone down. I thought, you try and stay away from the machinations of it. Maybe I'd, shown too much of my hand in actually getting involved in this programme. And I remember sitting down, and my wife came and she said, I've never seen you. I said, what am I doing? I said, not Pets Win Prizes. What am I doing working at the BBC? What am I doing? And that was when I thought, and not long after that, TFI Friday came along. And so to actually do this stuff and let Chris do it and sit back and kind of be arty to his Larry Sanders, if you like, it was a pleasure to me. So ending up on that programme On the Ropes where they said, you must have been humiliated just writing. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to get. When you say you've been you've been happy, lots and lots of things you've done, but I would suggest to you that perhaps you seem to say that the moment when you were playing Idle Jack in the Panto at Barking, that was a high moment.
Bless
wasn't
you.
it?
Bless you. Very few people remember my Jack. I liked him. He was a nice guy. That was perhaps a calling for being born out of time. Not as I say, but I'd surprised myself at that. I know people are used to Jonathan Miller on the show, but believe me, we are now at the theatre in Barking where I was doing a Christmas run. And the only job I was never paid for. And if anyone had ever told me, I'd say, well, it was not the money, it was the memories and all of that. But nobody got paid at that. Fella did a run with all the cash from it. But there was, it was a proper pantomime, sold out, and I had to come on and do Can't City Yourself, at home, Can't City Yourself. And all these old pros who were in the thing, old comedians, was showing me these that had to do the proper water siphon thing where someone ducks down and you get it in the face. This thing called hats.
Yeah, what is hats? Tell me this, because three hats.
There's three hats. Well, it's the old, it's a bit where it's only for 6 and 7 year olds, so it's your target audience. You'd have three hats on a table. I mean, I'm Idle Jack, but and I'm kind of this really was playing into the. He's a latter-day Tommy Steele thing, but I was happy with that. And I'd walk up to Captain and say, Captain, what's these hats on the table for, boy? So, well, I want to show you, and this to me is show business. Never mind, the subtleties of HBO. This is British show business at its best. This routine must be as old as the hills. I want to test your aptitude, boy. How many hats are there? So you'd say, how many hats are there? Well, can you count? And they'd go, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, there's only 3 hats there. And I go, no, look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the kids will go, he's counting twice. Well, supposing he did that 3 times, how would it be? 3 threes, what are they? 11. No, they're not. Yes, they are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And I remember when he was teaching me this, I thought, this is funny. This is just funny. And when you do stand with a house full of kids screaming, no, you're doing it twice. And I just thought, I've never been happier. Not on tour with the Pistols, not writing scripts for anyone. This just felt, and I was good at it. That was the thing.
And the happiness was because you knew it was coming up. You knew you were going to
I'll tell you
the
old talk about old school. There was a fella, Paddy Daly, who in fact was the producer of the show, who actually couldn't quite meet the financial needs of it. But he used to be in an act called Daly and Wayne. He's gone now. Daly and Wayne were the number 4 turn. They used to have Morecambe and Wise, Mike and Bernie Winters. Then it was they went off to Vegas. I'll remember him in a second. And 4th double act was Daly and Wayne. Now, Paddy Daly was down on his luck a bit and put this show together, but he was teaching me all this stuff. And I remember my first line on this. This is the most animated I've been in an interview. My first line in this, I had to come on. He said, "Oh, you look like a bright young lad." "Yes, sir. Let me ask you some questions." "OK, sir." Pure crackerjack stuff, but what a joy to do. "OK, sir, what is it?" "Name a bird that can't fly." "A bird that can't fly? A penguin." "Why can't it fly?" "Because it's a chocolate biscuit." And I said to him, I don't know. I said, here we are, 1985 or whatever it was. "Really? Penguins chocolate?" He said, "Well, what do you want to do?" I said, "Well, I'm a writer, actually." He said, "Well, I'll tell you what, we'll do it. If it don't play, then you OK." So out we went in the first house, and all the kids said, "Hey, it's Idle Jack, Can't City Yourself." "Hey, you look like a lucky-looking lad. Let me ask you some questions. You want to come on my ship?" "Oh, I'd love to go to sea, sir." "Then name me a bird that can't fly." "Oh, a penguin." "Why can't it fly?" "Because it's a chocolate biscuit." They went, "What?" And they couldn't stop laughing. And Paddy Daly leant across to me and went, "Anything else you want to change?"
Johnny Baker.
And I said, I said, no, Paddy. And I've never been happy in that moment, but there's certainly been echoes of it throughout it.